Hi guys, welcome to A&B Homemaker, a place where we are redefining the modern homemaker through recipes, thoughts, ideas, and so much more. And today I am super excited to share what I've been thinking about with y'all. So, per usual, I have been doing a Bible study like I love to do, and I came across the story of Samson that's found in Judges. But specifically, what stood out to me and what I want to talk with you all today about is the last few chapters of Samson's life that can be found in Judges chapter 16 verses 27 through 30. And so a lot of us are familiar with the story of Samson. We're familiar with how mighty and how strong he was, how Samson was taking out large groups of the Philistines just for fun, to humiliate them, to embarrass them, to get revenge when he felt like he needed to be avenged. Samson has had a long history, when you read through his life, a long history of really taking on the Philistines and being successful, being victorious, overwhelmingly victorious every time he comes across them. Except the verses that really caught my attention were the last few verses that really capture the tail end of Samson's life. We have this mighty warrior who has been taking down these people all of his life, and then he's caught. And when we look at these verses, Samson is now a prisoner of the Philistines. He is chained up, he is blinded. He is now their entertainment of the same people that he once used to humiliate. And I just had to think about how, number one, how much anxiety that would bring on, and how much fear and concern when you have made enemies with someone and you have been torturing them and you've been really just beating them down all of those years, thinking about the joy and the pleasure that they must have had in their eyes when they finally got him. The excitement that he could hear as they were talking about all the ways that they were going to torture him. And the ways that their minds have been dreaming and thinking about all the things that they were going to do once they finally got the mighty Samson. And here it is, that day has come and they've got him. And so when I was reading through the last few verses of Samson's life, we come to a point where we see that he is blinded, he is chained, he is the entertainment for his enemies, and he finally turns to God. And it's the first prayer that we see Samson pray to God. And he asks God for one last bit of strength to be able to take out his enemies, to be able to crush the Philistines. And God grants him that request. And he allows him to give one mighty push to take out the pillars. And he brings down and kills more Philistines in that instance than he had throughout his entire lifetime. And one of the questions that I had to ask was, how did we get here? How did we get from the mighty Samson to the blinded, chained entertainment that Samson has become at the end of his life? And so, of course, I had to take it back to the beginning. And so I looked at the beginning of Samson's life, and even before he was born, an angel of the Lord appeared to his parents and let them know, you are about to give birth to a son who is going to be a mighty son, a mighty warrior, and he is going to be a Nazarite who is going to free the people of Israel out of the control of the Philistines. And so, of course, the next question is, what's a Nazarite? So I went and I looked at what a Nazarite was, and a Nazarite is essentially someone who's made a vow to commit themselves to God. And that is someone who is not going to have wine or strong drink. They're not going to come into contact with the dead or defile themselves, and they're also not going to cut their hair. Typically, this vow lasts for about 30 to 100 days. And so at the end of the 130 days, the man or woman who has taken the vow will go on about their lives. Sometimes they'll do it multiple times in their lifetime. But the thing about Samson is he was a lifelong Nazarite. He was called to commit his life from birth over to God. And that was interesting to me as I was reading it, because the point of the vow is to consecrate yourself to God. It's to bring you closer to him, to have that time of like a really intense version of a fast where you get to really be with God and be close to him. Except when I looked at the life of Samson, I had a hard time seeing where Samson had a life that reflected that he was devoted to God. I had a hard time seeing where, until the end of his life, where he had prayed to God, where he had really spent time asking God, what would you like me to be doing? How would you like me to be using my time? How would you like me to be using the strength that you have given me? And so it just really spoke to me as we saw how Samson was able to use the gifts of God without appreciating the God that had given the gifts. And it's understandable when you talk about being young and having that kind of power and strength where you can do whatever you want and really no one can challenge you, not effectively. I mean, you could say something, but what are you going to do? Samson can bust out of your chains, he can bust out of your ropes and then tear you up, which is what he had been doing to the Philistines for all of this time. And it's understandable that when you have that kind of power and you have that kind of strength and you aren't under any kind of submission, that kind of power unchecked can become intoxicating. It can become something that is blinding, and it really takes over all of your senses, and it takes over how you move and how you think and your goals and your plans. And so this kind of power has created this tantalizing sense of pleasure that has really removed God from Samson's view and from his focus. And that, when I started thinking about how that can happen in society today, and a lot of us have become really focused on the power to control our lives and the power to control our narratives. We want the power to control the good and the bad that we experience, to be able to plan, predict, and control our future, what happens, where we go, who we're with, all of those things solely based on what makes us happy. And that it's understandable thinking about the fact that we live in a society that is really based on instant gratification and finding out information as quickly as possible so we can make an informed decision. And that, from Ask Jeeves as in elementary school to the more sophisticated Google or Hey Siri that we use now, we've really become we've really come to a point in society where we really focus on how we can control things and how we can control the narrative and have that kind of power over our lives, when in fact we're called to submit our lives to God, and that our lives are not our own, but they really belong to him. And so as I look at Samson, it is conceivable and it's believable that when you have that kind of power and you have that kind of control, that it can become intoxicating and really remove God from the picture. And so now we have Samson, the Nazarite, the judge of Israel, who's called to free God's people from the control of the Philistines, has now become so enthralled in the power that he's lost sight of God, lost sight of his purpose and what he was initially created for. And it's all because he can't give his heart to God. He will not give his heart to God. And he will not submit under God's rule and submit to the purpose that God has created for him. However, when we look at where Samson did give his heart, we meet Delilah. The infamous Delilah of the Samson and Delilah dynamic that a lot of people, Christians and non-Christians alike, are familiar with these two. And so we see that as Delilah, who's among the Philistines, comes into the picture, the Bible says that Samson loved her. And Samson and Delilah are together, and Delilah's consistently asking Samson time and time again, tell me how to subdue you. And each time Samson has given her some kind of answer that is not true, but we see that Delilah tries it. And and it will wake him up and let him know, like, the Philistines are coming upon you, like you're about to be taken over. And he, of course, shakes himself free because the answer he gave her wasn't true. But time and time again, she's proving that she does not love him back, that staying with her is not in his best interest. However, when you give your heart to someone who does not love you and you are not called to, you can find yourself with a dangerous blind spot. You can find yourself in a situation where you have now committed yourself to someone and you are submitting and committed and wholly attaching yourself to someone who does not have your best interest in mind, and in fact is actually out to take you down and destroy you. And you don't even realize it because you've decided to give them your love. You've given them your heart and your commitment. And that is the situation that we see Samson in. However, I will say that I am cautious and mindful when I look at Samson, because I understand that many of us have been in situations where we have been in relationships with people that we had no business being with, doing things that we had no business doing. And that is something that a lot of people get caught up in. However, you have to be careful because sometimes it can cost you so much when you refuse to give your heart to God. And that is where we see Samson, where he has given his heart to the wrong person. He's actually given his heart to one of God's enemies. One of the people that he is called to free the people of Israel from has now got his heart. And because he will not submit to God and because he will not give his heart to God, Samson now finds himself captured by the enemies that he was once able to overtake and he was once able to have victory over. And now he's their entertainment. Now he's being humiliated by the same people that he used to once enjoy taking down and having victory over. And one of the things that I thought about when I thought about the submission that Samson could have had, the submission that Samson was supposed to give to God, I thought about one of the greatest examples of submission in the Bible, and that is of Jesus. Specifically, I thought of Jesus in the Garden of Gethsemane, where we see Jesus praying to God, where he is asking for God to pass the bitter cup of crucifixion, of the death and the burial that are coming towards him. He's asking God to take it away. But at the end of each prayer, Jesus continues to affirm that he will submit to God's will. And then we see that submission carried out. And we see that Jesus submits himself to God's will of Jesus going to the cross, of going through the trial, of being humiliated, of being beaten, of being nailed to a cross, of dying. But we also know that what started off grim ends up victorious and glorious, as we know that in the end, Jesus raises with all power in his hand and is on the right hand of the throne with the Father. And so it made me wonder, what could have Samson's life been if he had learned how to submit his heart to God? Could his story have been different? Could his story have ended with a different kind of victory that didn't require him to give his last bit of strength? If he had been praying to God throughout his lifetime instead of just at the very end? Could his story have been different, where he would be one of the great judges of Israel that really led the people through victory? When we look at Gideon and we look at Gideon's life and how he was able to submit to God and have a great, wonderful victory, what could Samson's life have been if he had submitted to God? And so I want to ask you, what could your life be if you would submit to God? What kind of victory could you have? What kind of power could you have? What kind of things, great things in the earth could you carry out if you would give your heart to God, if you would submit to him and to his will? So I'll leave you with this. Will you give God your heart, and will you submit to him? Bye.